Hey guys, Cows here. This is a video guide for my MFTS Winripper build. It is a magic finding build. It looks to stack a whole bunch of item quantity and a whole bunch of movement speed in order to go through maps quickly and get a lot of items. So, this is not a novel build. This is a relatively well-known build. I mean, it's probably the most popular build on standard, but I always get a lot of questions asking me, like, what are optimal gear choices? Why don't I have a lot of life? I can't clear tier 6 maps, what do I do? Stuff like this. So I'm here to explain everything, literally everything, about the MFTS Winripper build. So, a couple things to get out of the way. I am on standard. I am using legacy gear. The legacy gear is strictly better in terms of item quantity and realistically has no impact on your damage output. The only difference damage wise between this build and say a league build is the Winripper bow. I'm using a double legacy Winripper, which has 25% increased quantity of items found and a higher base crit chance. The new version of the bow has less quantity, it has 15% quantity of items dropped. That is the newest version, and the single legacy version both have 15%. But the newest version of the Winripper bow has lower crit chance and effectively lower base crit chance. So that is realistically the only DPS difference you will find between this build and the league build. Okay, so first I'm going to explain a little bit about the build, how it works, why it works, and what it's used for. So basically, what we do is we take as much item quantity as we can get from our gear and we apply it to a whole bunch of movement speed. When we move through maps quickly and we kill a lot of monsters quickly with a lot of item quantity on our gear and on our skills, we get a lot of items very fast. Item quantity makes mobs drop more items. So if you clear a whole bunch of mobs really quickly, they're all dropping more items. It's effectively a multiplier to the number of items you get. So you can think about our return, our profit per maps, as movement speed times quantity equals profit. The faster we go, the faster we clear, the more items we drop, the more items we get. Alright, that is the basis of the build. So how do we accomplish that? Well, we use Goldworm. I'm not using Legacy Quant Gloves or Quant Gloves because I'm trying to level to 100, but we'd use Sedima's, Headhunter, Queen of the Forest, Rings with quantity, Amulet with quantity, Rigwald's Coils for clear, a helmet with whatever you want to put on it. In standard you can use quantity, in league you would use Devotos or Sturkonjas, and a Winripper. I'll go into each one of these in depth, but basically what our gear does is it gives a whole bunch of quantity, a whole bunch of flat damage, a whole bunch of increases to damage, and then some additional properties to our skills like chain, fork, additional projectiles. We use our flasks to cap our evasion with Queen of the Forest, so we get the full 75% movement speed, and the other flasks we use are strictly for damage: Diamond, Sulfur, and Dying Sun. I'll go into each one of these in depth again. I'm just giving you an overview of the build. How does this build do damage? Well, our gear has a lot of percent increases on them ideally, but most of our damage comes from things like Abyss Jewels, things that give flat lighting damage to attacks, flat cold damage to attacks, attack speed if you crit recently. Let's see if I can find an example of that. Sorry, one sec. I might not have one equipped. I don't. But regardless, flat to attacks, global crit strike multiplier, more flat to attacks, and unnatural instinct, which I'll get into later. All of these flat increases to our lightning damage, to our cold damage, to our fire damage, whatever elemental damage they are, on these Abyss Jewels, will apply to Tornado Shot. Each jewel gives us a ton of damage. You can think about each jewel, realistically, if you have a well-rolled one like this one. This gives a total of about 150 flat elemental damage and 10 global crit strike multiplier. If we look at Winripper, Winripper gives 130-ish, or 140 flat elemental damage, right? this jewel is equivalent, if not better, than our Wind Ripper in terms of pure damage output, right? So if we stack a whole bunch of these jewels, all of these flat damage increases across our passive tree by taking all the jewel sockets that we can, mine aren't even particularly good, we can achieve ridiculous amounts of elemental damage, flat elemental damage to attacks, which is only further increased by all the increases on our gear. For example, increased elemental damage with attack skills, increased damage while leeching, things like this. We then have more multipliers like damage on full life, which is the gem I'm using in my 6-link tornado shot setup. Elemental damage with attack supports, again another more multiplier. So you can see where our damage starts to like really increase, right? Things can get exponentially more powerful. How do we get a decent health pool? Well, the honest truth is that with this build, you can't really achieve one. The maximum life pool you can have with mirror to your gear is about 6.5 to 7k. If you're going over that, you're probably sacrificing damage for life, which is reasonable, but you get one shot a lot of the time anyway, because this build has no real defensive mechanics outside of strictly dodging things and evading attacks. So a lot of the time the life pool is somewhat irrelevant. But if you want to achieve a high life pool, you should look to get max life on your Abyss Jewels, max life on your tree, take all the high percent increase nodes. There. A couple other ones on the tree that I didn't point out, like this one, right? The one down here. So that's how you achieve a reasonable life total. I think in League, for a non-perfect character, a realistic life total for this build is about 3,500 to 4,500. That is a really good life total if you take all the life nodes, including the ones at the beginning of the tree like these. If you're looking to really min-max the build and you have very expensive gear, very optimal gear, for example, like in Standard where you can have these legacy pieces, you can look for about 6 to 7 to 7.5k of life. Okay, so what do we grab on the passive tree that helps us deal more damage? Well, we grab pretty much every node that increases bow damage, projectile damage, and elemental damage to attacks. So we have the wheel down here, which gives us projectile damage. We have point blank, which gives us, basically, I'll spare you the details, but it gives you more damage, specific wording here, more damage, the closer you are to enemies, basically. The farther the projectile damage travels, the less damage it'll deal in terms of the bonus from point blank. We grab increased critical strike chance, increased critical multiplier, and then we also grab increased elemental damage to attacks, and then penetration with attacks. There are more examples of this on the tree. There's some multi here. There's some increased elemental damage with attacks and penetration here. There is some damage in the beginning of the tree here, like projectile damage and attack speed. There is generic 20% increased damage with bows here. There's more attack speed here. There's damage crit strike chance, multi crit strike chance. And then we grab Harrier, which is 9% attack speed, cast speed, and movement speed. And then we get a lot of damage from Unnatural Instinct, which is a jewel I haven't yet explained. Basically, if you have this jewel in the specific slot, it will give you 45 crit multi, 9% movement speed, 13% attack speed, and 8% max life. The other stats are relatively irrelevant. Lastly, we grab a Watcher's Eye. This doesn't necessarily increase our damage, but the mod 15% increased movement speed while affected by Grace increases our movement speed, which you can think of as an increase to our damage in a way. It's not really, but the faster you go through a map, the more monsters you clear, the better off you are. So we can turn this movement speed into speed in terms of like faster clearing of a map. It's kind of how you have to think about it. Then lastly, our Ascendancy gives us some pretty good damage. We get Scales Fire, an additional projectile from the Deadeye Endless Munitions Ascendancy node. We get Ricochet, Skills Chain +1 times, projectiles deal 10% more damage for each remaining chain. This gives us great pack clear in combination with the projectiles Fork from Rigwold's Quills. We also get Tailwind, which is an action speed effect, where you'll move faster based on how many stacks. The max stacks you can have, I think, is 20. And then we have far shot, largely irrelevant, but projectile speed in the far shot keystone itself, which says here at the bottom, projectile attacks gain damage as they travel farther, dealing up to 30% more damage, is in conjunction with point blank, gives us some interesting mechanics based on how far we are from the target and how much damage they take. Okay, so that is the passive tree. In a nutshell, we grab all the big life nodes, we stack elemental damage on our Abyss Jewels. We also grab life if we need. We look to grab all the jewel sockets so that we can add more Abyss Jewels to our tree. We grab generic increases to damage, like projectile damage, increased elemental damage with attacks, crit strike chance and crit multiplier, damage penetration, generic damage with bows, stuff like that. Okay, so that's the passive tree, that's the ascendancy, that's how we deal damage, that's how we get decent life. What about the gear? What do we use to optimize our movement speed and our quantity? Well, the obvious choice if we're going MF is a Wind Ripper. The current version of the bow has 15% increased quantity of item drop by slain frozen enemies. It also has lower base crit chance. This is a legacy version. It does not exist in leagues. The newest version of the bow has comparatively less base crit strike chance. What this means is that you will deal a little bit less damage, but it's not that much and it's pretty marginal, so that the build functions pretty much the same as it does in standard as it does in league. In league, you won't be using a rare legacy quantity base like you see here. You will be using a Ventor's Gamble, which is this ring. It can roll minus 10% increased quantity of items found to 10% increased quantity of items found. You want to make sure that you have a positive increased quantity of items found, Ventor's Gamble. It can roll a negative value, which is going to be detrimental to your item quantity, right? Because it will give you less items. You want to have one with a positive value so that you get more items. Additionally, this item can roll max life and tri-res. But those tri-reses can also roll negative. You can see that it can roll minus 25 to 50%. Realistically, you want a Ventor's Gamble with positive quantity of items found, positive resistances, and relatively high max life. That is ideal. You don't necessarily need all the resistance to be positive as long as you're capped. And even if you're running lower tier maps, you can arguably drop max resist for just generic life and damage. But if you're running higher tier maps, you want to cap your resistances, so you have to run with Ventor's Gambles with positive resistances. You want to use 2 of these, or you can use 2 White Socket Pariahs. Ideally, you would use a Ventor's Gamble because they also let you cap your res. Pariah does not. For the helm in League, you want to use a Starkonjas or a Devotos. Starkonjas and Devotos give you, or I should start with Starkonjas. Starkonjas gives you max life, attack speed, increased evasion rating, which will help you cap Queen of the Forest, which is somewhat relevant, and dexterity, which is largely irrelevant. What this means is that you get a unique helm that's pretty easy to get in League, that has high max life and crit strike chance. 2 things, and attack speed. 3 things that will help you clear mobs and survive. Devotos is the more offensive option in League. It gives you movement speed and attack speed. It also gives you a little bit of dexterity, but again, largely irrelevant. The reason you use one of these 2 helmets is because they are commonly enchanted in League. They both are synergistic with the build, and you can often find tornado shot projectiles on them in League relatively early on. For the amulet, in standard, obviously you will use a 20% quantity of items found amulet, but in League that is not available. The only thing available in League is a 10% max roll shaped quantity amulet. That means that you'll want to use one, right? So you have to find a shaped amulet with 10% increased quantity of items found. Additionally, you can use a Bisco's Collar. Bisco's Collar is sort of a subpar item nowadays because it only gives you quantity of items dropped by slain normal enemies. The generic item quantity you see on like this amulet and this ring and these boots and this, they all will give you quantity for any mob you kill. Bisco's only gives you quantity on normal monsters. While this averages out to about the same, in the end, a 10% quantity Shaper's Amulet will beat out a Bisco's Collar. The one advantage to using a Bisco's Collar is that you can often find one with a decent corruption. Okay, Boots, you want to use Goldworm. There is no other option in Standard or League there are options in Standard, but there are not options in League for quantity in the boot slot other than Goldworm. You want to use one. The current version of the boots roll 20% increased quantity of items found in League. The standard versions can roll up to 30% because they're legacy. For a belt, you want to use Headhunter. Headhunter is the sort of chase unique for the build. It lets you, when you're doing high tier mapping and moderate tier mapping with juiced up maps, with Sexton, Chisels, Alks, Frags, Prophecies, to zoom through it because you get so many monster affixes at one time. If you read Headhunter, it says when you kill a rare monster, you gain one of its modifiers. A lot of these modifiers apply to attack-based builds. They give you more damage, more life, more speed, soul leader, etc., etc. It's a very good unique. It helps you chew through maps in the end game. For gloves, in League, you have a couple options. The newest version of Sedima's, which is where's my tab? Right here. The newest version of Sedima's can get up to 10% quantity of items found. The single legacy can roll up to 16. The double legacy can roll up to 24. In League, you obviously want to use a 10% one. If you feel like that slot isn't worth the 10% and you want to use other gloves, you can use rare gloves crafted with resistances, max life, attack speed, or you can use a 2-socket Tomb Fist and put Abyss Jewels in it for extra flat damage. You see here that I'm using a series of QD Val Gauntlets. This specific one is Legacy, unique to Standard. It gives me life and mana leech from critical strikes instantly. This is because I'm now level 99 and I'm pushing for level 100. I want the additional safety of having instant leech. It's not a necessary unique for this build, nor is it particularly great, but I'm simply pushing for 100 and I want to live. I just don't want to die. That's most of the gear. I think I haven't explained the bow. The quiver. The quiver is Rigwald's Quills. It's a relatively expensive item, but it can be solo farmed, self-farmed in layer maps with Rigwald as the boss. Any monster in the map can drop the Woven King div card. 8 of them makes a Rigwald's Quills. The reason we use this thing is because it gives us Projectile's Fork. Projectile's Fork in conjunction with Chain makes it so that we clear entire screens worth of mobs. Additionally, it gives us increased projectile damage, which is generic increase to our damage. And if you can find one with a reasonable corruption on it, like I have Bow Attacks, Fire, and Additional Arrow, this is an ideal corruption. Same with a Skills Chain +1 times. If you can find one with, for example, Point Blank or flat elemental damage, it's better than the base implicit. On to flasks. Why do we use these flasks? So Alchemist Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline is the single best flask in terms of movement speed. It'll give you 40% from the base, up to 30% increased movement speed during flash effect from the mod, and then the other mod is 25% increased effect. This increased effect is only applied to the item's base movement speed, so it only applies to the 40% movement speed. So if you have a perfectly rolled Alchemist Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline, you can get 80% movement speed from this flask alone. Next, we'll use a Jade Flask. Because I am on Standard, and because I have a Legacy Queen of the Forest, the mod here reads 1% increased movement speed per 450 evasion rating up to 75%. On League, the current version of Queen of the Forest is 1% increased movement speed per 600 evasion up to 75%. In Standard, because you have access to this one, you can drop a mod on this flask and run a Curse Immunity Flask. In League, because you have the nerfed version of Queen of the Forest, you generally have to use a Surgeon's Jade Flask of Reflexes. What that means is it'll be a flask, I don't have an example here, with the 20% chance to gain a flash charge when you deal a critical strike, but also a percent increased evasion rating mod. That's the Reflexes affix. You can roll up to 100% increased evasion rating. That will help you cap your evasion, which if we do some math really quickly, we do 600 times 75. That's not right. 1% increased movement speed for 600 evasion rating up to 75%. Right. So 600 times 75 is 4,500. Right. That is the number. That is the evasion rating you need to cap Queen of the Forest. If you have a standard one, if you have a legacy one, you need 33,750. So it's comparatively less evasion rating that you need in Standard than you do in League, which is why you can drop the percentage increase reflexes affix, and run a curse immunity flask. The other 3 flasks we run are an Experimenter's Diamond Flask of Staunching. This is to give us the implicit from the flask, which is your critical strike chance is lucky. Basically what this means is that when you hit a monster, it'll roll, the damage you deal to that monster will roll twice. It will pick the higher value as the option that hits the monster. We use we also use the bleeding immunity because bleeding is one of the toughest things bleeding often will kill you if you don't have an immunity to bleeding affix. We use the increased duration on this flask because it's important to never take bleed damage. We use a Chemist Sulfur Flask of Heat. This can also be a Surgeon Sulfur Flask of Heat. Mine just isn't properly rolled. Basically what it does is it gives us the Consecrated Ground effect, which is going to increase our crit chance against monsters that are on that Consecrated Ground. It gives us a generic 40% increased damage from the base Sulfur Flask. It also gives us freeze immunity, so we don't get stuck on things like strongboxes and on bosses, for example, like Mervel. Lastly, we use a Dying Sun. This gives us 2 additional projectiles during our flash effect. Projectile increases to Tornado Shot are incredibly valuable. Each additional projectile is a more multiplier to your damage. In addition, with the Tornado Shot fires 2 additional secondary projectiles. This applies on each projectile you shoot. So it's a more multiplier to how much damage you deal with this build. So it's very important to run a Dying Sun if you can get one. It's a big DPS increase. That is the gear. Let's go into the gem links. So on Standard, unlike in League, you have the opportunity to use an item quantity support gem. This is a legacy support gem, which means it is not available in Leagues. It is only available in Standard and actually no longer drops in Standard. So it's a legacy item in Standard as well. This income, if you link it to your skills, will give you quantity on the monsters you slay with your skills. So for example, this is linked to Tornado Shot and Mirage Archer. If my Mirage Archer or myself clearing with Tornado Shot kills a monster, that monster will drop increased item quantity from this gem, but also from all the other quantity gear I have, on my character added up. So let's go over gem links. In League, instead of item quantity support, you will likely use added cold damage or added lightning damage, one of the two. But in Standard, you use item quantity. The next thing you link it to is elemental damage with attacks. This is a more multiplier for your damage. I will spare you the details. More multipliers are really good in Path of Exile. They really increase your damage. Damage on full life, again, is a more multiplier. Again, sparing you the details. It gives you a lot of damage. Realistically, with this build, because you're leeching so often and clearing maps so quickly, monsters won't hit you. If you get hit, you die, so you'll most of the time be on full life. Greater multiple projectile support is a gem that gives us additional projectiles, like I mentioned before. Additional projectiles are really good. This is a gem not only gives you more damage because it gives you extra projectiles, it also lets you clear better because multiple projectiles shooting multiple Tornado Shot, little secondary projectiles, plus the enchant, plus other bow attacks, fire, additional arrow, plus the chain, plus the fork will clear the entire zone. Then we run Tornado Shot, obviously, which is the main skill of the build. It looks like this. That's an MTX on it. But you'll see that when I fire, it shoots a whole bunch of these guys. These things hit the ground. And those secondary projectiles are what are going to deal the damage. When they explode, you see all those little shots that go around? That's what's going to kill monsters. Sorry. Mirage Archer, you can't see it in Hideout, but a little guy will pop up on my head when I kill a thing with Tornado Shot, or when I use the ability, rather. That little guy will shoot Tornado Shot as well as me, so it gives me sort of like another attack while I'm attacking. This guy, in the long story short, it gives you more damage. Just a way of thinking about it. Plus, it helps you clear consistently. Oftentimes, if you're very juiced up with Headhunter, you have a lot of buffs, and you're in a map that doesn't have ridiculously high mob affixes or hard affixes, you can reliably run through the map without shooting and have the Mirage Archer solo the map for you. This is pretty nice because it's a big quality of life in terms of moving through a map and not having to sort of like stutter step like this to shoot the Tornado Shot projectile. That is the main skill and its links. Next, we have a secondary skill, which is Herald of Ice. Herald of Ice is an aura. What it does is it gives us flat damage to our attacks, but when we kill an enemy with Herald of Ice, they will explode and deal AoE cold damage. We can take advantage of this because we can link Herald of Ice to Curse on Hit, Assassin's Mark. What this means is that whenever we kill something with Herald of Ice and that explosion hits another enemy, that enemy will be cursed with Assassin's Mark. And Assassin's Mark makes it so that hit enemies have 2.5% additional chance to get crit. This is a base crit chance multiplier, and they also take additional damage from critical strikes. So not only is this a good way to increase our crit strike chance, it deals more damage to enemies, and it also generates power charges. It's pretty strong. It also gives us some what's called flat leech. So where it says cursed enemies grant 25% life when killed. This leech is instant. It's instant 25% life gain. Doesn't take time to recover, which is quite nice, but it's not so relevant. I have this linked to another item quantity support. Again, this is a standard only option. In League, you can often substitute this for something else. In League, you'd like to use item rarity. You'd likely drop this and run a 5 link, for example, if you wanted to. You could also run an additional damage modifier for Herald of Ice, like added cold or something like that. But in standard, you want to use item quantity. And then we have Herald of Ice, obviously, which is what's allowing us to do all this. The last two links are quality of life links. When Herald of Ice kills something, it has a chance to proc Onslaught, which gives us movement speed and attack speed. Additionally, when Herald of Ice kills something, it has a chance to give us frenzy charges through Ice Bite support. Ice Bite support also gives Herald of Ice additional cold damage, which makes it more likely to kill things. Those are the 6 link setups. Those are the skills that we use to clear maps. What else do I have in here? Well, we run Grace for the extra evasion. This is in part to do cap Queen of the Forest. It's very difficult to cap Queen of the Forest evasion rating without Grace. Grace is a flat, almost 3,000%, 3,000 flat evasion rating, almost that. And then the Val version of this skill gives us a chance to dodge attacks. This is important for bossing because you can pop it and realistically kind of face tank stuff. You shouldn't, but you can, and not die because you'll dodge. We run Blink Arrow. This is a movement skill. It just gets us from place to place. It lets us traverse walls, which are often pretty annoying. I have this link to Zealotry and Portal. Zealotry is just a gem I'm leveling. It does nothing for the build. And Portal is just where I have my Portal gem slotted. It's a quality of life thing. It lets me summon a portal wherever I am. You'll see a portal. I guess it doesn't spawn in Hideout. What else do I have? I have Summon Ice Golem and cast when damage taken, Immortal Call, Molten Shell. This is a setup that I have from another character, which is why the Mortal Call, cast when damage taken, and Molten Shell are all level 20. Realistically, I would just use Summon Ice Golem, cast when damage taken, and Mortal Call all at like level 5 or something like that, and they wouldn't be level 20, but because I have this specific setup from another character, I just slapped it into this build. You probably want to use a lower damage ceiling cast when damage taken because this one doesn't proc reliably on this character. The last set of gems is I have Haste, Phase Run, Enhance, and Increased Duration. Basically, the setup is mainly for Phase Run. I just have Haste slotted in here. The Increased Duration applies to the Val Haste, which is quite nice. Phase Run is a skill that we pop. It gives us a little bit of extra movement speed. If we have it qualityed up through Enhance, Enhance gives us an extra, I don't know how much movement speed. Let's see, 62%. If we take Enhance out, we have 50%. So it gives us 12% movement speed on Phase Run, which is relatively important. Haste for increased attack speed and movement speed. We don't actually run the aura. We only use this for the Val version, which gives us attack speed and cast speed and movement speed on bosses. Increased duration to increase both the duration of Phase Run, but also Val Haste. We have a neat interaction here between the frenzy charges we generate from Ice Bite and Phase Run. Phase Run's duration is increased per frenzy charge. Because we can get 3 frenzy charges max from Ice Bite killing stuff, we can increase the duration of our Phase Run, which is why we run the 2 jewels in conjunction. That is the gems, the items, the passive tree, the flasks, and the build itself. I don't think there's anything else I realistically need to cover. But if there is, let me know. I can go over the Pantheon. It's largely, again, irrelevant. Let me go talk to Sin. So the Pantheon doesn't really do much for this build like it does for some other builds. I happen to have Soul of the Brine King, so if I've gotten stunned, I can't get stunned again. I also have Soul of Shikari, which is reduced chaos damage. I probably want immune to poison. This is a pretty important thing to have. I just don't have it for God knows what reason. But yeah, reduced chaos damage is important because we have super negative chaos resistance. There's no realistic way to cap chaos resistance in this build without sacrificing so much damage or life or whatever. So just don't do it. Just pray that you don't get hit by a lot of chaos damage. Also, there really isn't much chaos damage that can kill you now that you can't play around. So you should be fine in that way. That is the build. That is the items, the gems, the Pantheon, the Ascendancy, the passive tree, how we deal damage, how we have life, why we pick the gear we do, how the build works. So I think I've covered everything. In another video, I will cover how to roll maps, how to run maps, what I do to sustain, and what this build is realistically capable of in terms of party play and stuff like that. So thank you for watching. I hope this was informative. If you have questions, leave it in the comments, leave it in the description, and I will do my best to answer them as soon as I can. Thanks.